Greetings, YouTube. I mentioned a research paper that I did in my October 1st Word of the Day, so if any of you are interested, here it is. Patriotism is quite a noble way to show honor and devotion to such abstract concepts as freedom, equality, and peace. It is much like a wedding in which the bride and groom vow to stay together for eternity. But what if the citizens and leaders of the country you're pledging allegiance to have little tolerance of your lifestyle? In this day and age of extreme differences and liberal mindsets, acceptance of change is hard to come by. Arabs coming to the country post 9/11 are sneered at as possible terrorists, while people claiming to be witches are beaten down on the streets by militant fundamentalists without provocation. The Pledge of Allegiance, as it was originally written, avoided issues such as these. When Under God was added, it was thought to bring America together. However, because it violates the separation of church and state from the First Amendment, was inserted hastily during troubled times, and belittles and outright ignores the multitude of religions in America, the phrase "under God" should be removed from the Pledge of Allegiance. The first and foremost reason the phrase doesn't even belong in the pledge is because it violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The relevant portion of this text reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." This is the case, then how did God, a religious figure, make its way into the government-adopted pledge? In 2002, Dr. Michael Newdow tried arguing against the phrase's validity, claiming that it violated his daughter's freedom from religion. It's admirable for Newdow to take this stance, since, according to an article I read, it's clear that only some of the students who say the pledge actually have the intellectual maturity necessary to question its appropriateness. Though possible, it's highly unlikely for a child who's still in a grade that implements the pledge routine to question the necessity of saying it, other than the fact that he might think it tedious. But like Newdow has argued, it can also have a negative, or at least imposing effect on a child who grows up in an atheistic or non-Judeo-Christian environment. A pagan child might question why the goddess isn't mentioned. An atheist, like Newdow's daughter, might question why the God they don't believe in is mentioned at all. It's as Ninth Circuit Judge Alfred Goodwin asserts, given the age and impressionability of school children, particularly within the confined environment of the classroom, the policy is highly likely to convey an impermissible message of endorsement to some and disapproval to others of their beliefs regarding the existence of a monotheistic God. It all comes down to a matter of whether the phrase is an acceptable representation of America, most notably its children. If they're told to say the pledge, they might start believing that God exists despite the amount of religious activity within their family. Simply put, the pledge is a violation of the freedom America so greatly treasures. And as Matt Jameson concludes in an interview, freedom of religion not only means any religion, but freedom from religion. The American youth should not feel like religion is part of the country, nor that they are compelled to believe it. Secondly, the phrase "under God" was amended to the pledge against the author's will, while the U.S. was in a state of paranoia. Francis Bellamy's original 1892 Pledge of Allegiance was written so that any person of any country could show their devotion to whatever principles their country stood for. It originally read, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." It was an all-encompassing pledge for anyone living in a republic. Fast forward 35 years, and the Soviet Union arises as a superpower. McCarthyism, the belief that anyone could be an undercover communist working for Russia, was prevalent in the early 20th century. In order to differentiate between the U.S. democracy and Soviet communism, Americans were searching for a way to make us stand out. A sermon attended by then-President Eisenhower inspired a solution, putting God in the pledge. The change was partly motivated by a desire to differentiate between communism, which promotes atheism, and Western capitalistic democracies. Essentially, the main reason the phrase is in there is because we were afraid of the communists. The Cold War ended 15 years ago, so why is the phrase still in there? It's an obsolete relic from America's troubled past. It should be added that Bellamy opposed the changes made to his pledge while he was alive, and would have opposed a controversial change made posthumously, according to his granddaughter. Finally, the two words under God are powerful enough to imply religious singularity. To avoid pluralism is to deny that anything else exists. Difference is inherent in almost every concept between each thing that exhibits it. Case in point, the hundreds of religions represented by Americans. There's no state religion, nor is there an oligarchic group of priests ruling the country. What exactly does under God imply then? For one thing, the suggestion that a God even exists is inherent in its message. But there are other latent messages, such as the implication that there is only one God, and that God is male, else it would include goddess. These properties are the same as those attributed to the Judeo-Christian God, a specific deity, and thereby discounts the beliefs of both atheists and polytheists. If the pledge is to be a fair representation of Americans, it should reflect the religious trends of America. According to the 2000 census, 81.8% of participants declared that they were Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. What happened to the other 18.2% of the population? Are they irrelevant? Just because the 255 million Christians in North America are majority doesn't mean the minority shouldn't get its fair share because it obviously isn't good enough. Supporters of its inclusion said something strange about the phrase, though. Only 18% of a poll issued by the First Amendment Center and American Journalism Review said under God was a religious statement. Well, entry 1B of religion in the dictionary defines it as the service and worship of God or the supernatural. It may be true that some people don't like to go by dictionary definitions, but then it makes one wonder what these people define religion as and what they call their belief in God. The situation might be a bit different if the double standard that surfaces was addressed. Imagine what a Hindu child would feel having to recite a Muslim pledge, one nation under Allah, or a Muslim having to recite an atheist pledge, one nation godless, or a Christian having to recite a pagan pledge, one nation under the gods and goddesses of earth. It's not quite fair on anyone's part if the pledge to their country also latently contains a pledge to a god of a specific religion that they might not be members of. Times change. We grow out of ideals that, when we adopted them, seemed right, but later seem outdated. This is the case with the phrase under God that weaved its way around the First Amendment and religious plurality into the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a remnant from the Cold War, and simply put, it outright ignores the other religions of America. A pledge to a country that promotes freedom and equality should not contain a phrase that promotes the opposite.